guitar soars through the stormy skies. In the cold, hard light. In the shadows where whispers dwell,
1.3.
it's like guitar sings of love's farewell.
10-4, I just wanted to know if
Echoes of the heart once bold, now lost in the night's cold fold.
Yeah, I'll be 23 back on
Secrets
the
hidden
property kid. I'll be
deep
70 seconds
within,
of the Williams Road address.
tales of love that couldn't win, promises made in moonlight's glow, now broken like a shattered show. Sorrow in the guitar's cry, resilience in the sky. Through the night we'll find our way, carrying secrets, holding on today. Memories of laughter and tears, in the silence they appear, whispers of a time so true, when love was all we knew. Lost in the echoes of the past, wishing for what we had. In the dark we search for light, holding on to what we fight. Through the pain, through the night, we find strength in the fight. Sorrow in the guitar's cry, resilience in the sky. Through the night we'll find our way, carrying secrets, holding on today. Sorrow in the guitar's cry, resilience in the sky. Through the night we'll find our way, carrying secrets, holding on today.
21.
Serve me a card for a parking problem.
Foreigner 23.
Yes, 28.
Okay, hey everybody, good to see everybody. Let's see if I can get my picture to full size. I guess it won't go there. There seems to be a bug of StreamYard sometimes. Once I remove the picture, it still leaves my main picture in thumbnail mode. Well, that's okay. Seeing a small version of me is not a bad thing. Sometimes that's better than seeing me close up. Also, I'm working on a new mic here, so let me know how the mic sounds. Give me any feedback. It does have adjustable things on it. And I went with this new mic because the other mic had a loose connector that would always cause it to sometimes go out. So we'll talk about a few different things tonight. I want to talk about, it's been a while since I've been on. Haven't been doing a lot of shows, but we have a big new reboot of the channel that's going on. Let me try why this is. Yeah, I cannot make this the proper size. And who says size doesn't matter? I don't know why this won't get up here. Oh, good. Thank you, Jane. And good to see everybody. And I just saw we have a new member too. Joan, I think you remember before, Joan, but thank you for being here again as a member. Very much appreciated. Molly says it sounds great. Good. So thank you, guys. Hey, Frankie, good to see you. So we'll talk a little bit about the new format in a moment, which is going to start a week from this Monday, and a lot of the new things going on with it. And we'll talk about some of the things that go into that I think are important with the channel that I want to bring with us into that new format as I build a new team around me in that format too. So about all this stuff. And I want to go over a video. So I found a video by somebody. Her channel's bigger than mine. She's got a pretty good following. It's called I Don't Belong Here with Samantha Benigno. And she has some letters next to her name, which suggests she has some degrees. Probably, look, I don't mean to denigrate degrees, but some people get these continuing these master's degrees because their parents can afford to keep them in school, and they get something in some not necessarily the most say like social studies, social work, things like that. And I'm not denigrating the people that do that work. I'm just saying they may not always be the hardest programs to get into. So just because someone has a degree in that, they could be quite genius or they could be pretty limited. So we'll see though. But she does looks like a review of my book or something like that. It was really kind of strange the way she puts it too. She titled her video "Former Karen Reed Insider Turns" with a question mark. Does he know something we don't know? And this was put out 4 months ago. So we'll see what that it was. And I haven't listened to it yet. So I will listen to about 10, 15 minutes of it, and it'll be a surprise to us all when we hear what it is. So I also wanted to talk about some things generally, and I prepared these remarks a little bit ahead of time. I wrote them starting at 7:00, just in note form. So for those people out there that think that when they see me do this, oh my God, he's been handed his notes by the McAlberts. He's just a puppet. No, sometimes I go with notes, sometimes I don't. But the notes are things that I wrote myself just before the show. You'll be able to tell by the limited quality that it's not something that anybody took their time writing. All right, so raise your hand. Oops, I already scripted my. I use a program called Q Prompter when I do this sometimes. And I just have the notes up there where I try to ad lib from them. But it's a good program if you're ever looking for something like that. It's free, and it's a fairly good program. All right, raise your hand if you think you're a truthful person. Raise it if you believe you are a person of integrity. See, almost everybody will raise it, right? Well, what makes someone essentially a truthful person? Everyone has told a lie at some point. And I don't just mean lies like your wife tries on a new dress and asks if it makes her look fat. Of course, you're going to say no matter what. Or you ask your wife, is it true that size doesn't matter at all? Well, love motivates the answers that we're going to get in these questions. And so I don't really consider these to be lies. They're kind of white lies. They're not lies in the sense that they would indicate that you're a liar or you're not a person of integrity. So no, I'm not talking about lies like that. But even without those little white lies kind of thing, everyone has told a lie at some point. Hey, who finished off the dessert in the fridge or drank the last beer? You probably lied about something like that in your life. But we're not talking about that either. Unless you do it all the time, then maybe we are a little bit. But no, we're talking about those are isolated instances, and you can still be essentially an honest person. Why? Because there are no important stakes there. There's really no important stakes for you. The fact that you don't want to admit that you were the last person to eat dessert and finish it off. Now, some of the questions that we might ask in determining whether someone is essentially truthful or if they have integrity can be answered by a simple question. What did you stand to lose by being truthful? That's a pretty important question. If you didn't really stand to lose anything, you didn't risk anything, So, for example, let's say you've screwed up an important job at work, and maybe the wrong people are starting to be blamed for it. If you step up and tell your boss the truth, his appraisal of you might go downhill. You might even lose your job. You're admitting to be a fuck up. The boss might appreciate your honesty, but be twice as bothered by the fact that you fucked up the project. So it's taking a big risk. Now, you knew this risk and you told the truth anyway. That makes you a person of truth and integrity. So that's where the rubber meets the road. When you stand to lose something very important to you, do you, in that circumstance, still do the right thing and tell the truth? Now, the case of Karen Reed has revealed the truth of the truthfulness and the integrity of way too many people. Former U.S. Attorney Josh Levy has led a cushy life. Let me just check and see if the mic is still working. All right, very good. has led a cushy life, safely ensconced in the lush hallways of elite power. Summa cum laude at Brown, partner at high-low-file law firm, Ropes and Gray, ambitious, and he has plenty of reasons to think his ambitions would bear fruit. He has the pedigree, he has the connections. When Karen Reed and her attorneys used their connections to get a direct meeting with Josh Levy in August of 2022, he smelled opportunity. This could lead to headline-grabbing prosecutions, which could lead him to becoming what? Maybe U.S. attorney. That's what he really wanted. That's U.S. attorney. He at the moment when he had that meeting, he was working as first assistant U.S. attorney. Now he later would become U.S. attorney, but at that moment he wasn't. Or maybe he was interested in snagging a judgeship. I actually, in the last time I was on a trial at grand jury, the judge in the case was in Lawrence Superior Court, had his previous position before that had been U.S. attorney. In fact, he was talking to the jurors after the case, and one of the things he was saying was that he was disappointed that the Whitey Bulger thing all came down right after he left the position of U.S. attorney to become judge. So he had a lot of regrets that he didn't get to do the Whitey Bulger trial. As we know, my partner and friend Margaret McLean wrote a book on that, an excellent book on that trial. And Hank Brennan was also a former prosecutor from Lawrence, Mass, where I grew up. Hank represented Whitey Bulger. So who knows what ambition, if this led to enough headlines for Josh Levy, if they got some real big, if there was this massive cover up here and Josh helped expose it, this would be the cover up of a lifetime, right? This would be similar to uncovering some, conspiracy with JFK assassination. So to uncover something like this, what could that do for your ambitions? Maybe you're thinking run for senator at some point. You might even be thinking, how about attorney general in Washington? That's a cabinet level position in the White House. I mean, dare to dream, Josh, right? You are from a special and elite class, those destined to rule over the rest of us slobs. So he launches a pretty big investigation. He's got big eyes over this, Now, this investigation turns up nothing. Something, once again, proved in court this past week. Something that Sue O'Connell will neglect to notice or report because she's not interested in the truth. She doesn't have that integrity. Something that the Turtle Boy channel and the free FKR channels won't report. But I read the transcript on it, and the assistant U.S. attorney that was in this week in court talking about the case. There was a hearing on the guilty plea by the leaking grand juror from the federal grand jury. And the U.S. attorney, the assistant U.S. attorney that was sent to court said that case there was two cases apparently that were leaked, stuff about the CDL issue for the state police. There was a cabal of multiple state police troopers who were basically selling CDL licenses. And then there was also a connection to the Karen Reed case that this juror was leaking about. And what they mentioned in that was, specifically, they said the day of February 1st, when the last witness would testify before that federal grand jury, that apparently this juror was leaking about that too. Now, who testified on that last day? Well, Michael Proctor was the very last person to testify, and it was on February 1st. And he was the only person to testify that day. So she went on to say that case, this assistant U.S. assistant attorney, that case that the witness appeared on February 1st was officially over. So I don't know how many times people have to hear it. And then people like Rachel Rollins are going to go on and ignorantly say that, well, we don't know if the case is over. I mean, there's so many ways that we know this case is over. It's at the federal investigation into Karen Reed is over, that it's ridiculous. It's not sensible. It's in complete denial of the truth. So people that don't know, if they have the excuse that they don't know all the details and they don't know all the truth, well, then shut up. If you don't have the information, if you don't have the relevant facts, shut up. That's the honorable thing to do. And if you're not doing that, one has to ask what your agenda is. So in fairness, I would ask that about Rachel Rollins. What was her agenda in doing an interview with the Karen Reed reporter, who clearly was dirty, from Vanity Fair, someone who was obviously set up between Karen and probably with Rachel Rollins? The person setting this up was Alan Jackson. You won't convince me anything else. So why is she coming out now to do interviews with this reporter and saying such nonsense? Again, I have to say it. The issue is integrity. If you don't know the facts, you shouldn't be saying things like that. You're making irresponsible statements that you know are going to be interpreted by a larger part of the audience as some kind of, certainly by the Free Karen Reed world, as an argument for the fact that the investigation might not be actually closed. No, it is closed. And so Rachel Rollins tried to say, well, Hank Brennan, he's just a special prosecutor. He wouldn't know. So just because he reported in court doesn't mean it's true. Well, if Hank Brennan stood up before court and reported something like that and it wasn't false, you don't think the U.S. Attorney's Office would have sent a letter out to correct that, and that the defense would have been up in arms? David Yannetti get up there and correcting it himself? Come on, Rachel. That's not logical. And I know you're not stupid, Rachel, because I've talked to you 3 times on the phone, and I know you're not stupid at all. So you did this on purpose. You chose to do this, knowing what the effect would be. Only you can come clean about what your motive was. But I think you see some kind of way to build back support, strangely enough, in this Free Karen Reed Turtle Boy crowd, because this crowd is anything but liberal, which you're very liberal, Rachel. Anything but progressive. In fact, most of these people are very strong Trump supporters. So you are not going to be you're not going to recapture some popularity with them. So you may not really fully understand what you're dealing with this turtle crowd. But you're thinking you might get some popularity with them, right? And it's done before. Sue O'Connell was a liberal, and she became buddies with Turtle Boy, and she's been popular with that crowd. So I guess maybe it's not completely irrational to think that you could briefly capture some popularity from those turtle people. I guess you could. But the investigation is over, we know, for multiple reasons. But for one thing, I'm the one that broke the story. Leah Foley, the U.S. attorney herself, called up the Canton chief of police, the Norfolk County DA's office, and the state appropriate people at the state police to tell them the investigation was over in all aspects and that there will be no charges. She's basically had answered questions in other ways by saying, I'm not going to hold a press conference and say this because it's against DOJ policy. Now, I don't really agree with that. I'm not saying that she's wrong about that being kind of a policy, but it's not a law. It's not a rule. There was absolutely no barrier preventing her from to come out and make a statement, because in this case, it involves wrongdoing by her predecessor, Josh Levy. And she knows this. And other sources have told me, multiple sources, that she's outraged by the behavior of Josh Levy. But is she outraged enough? Well, I mean, people that Josh Levy left behind, I'm not going to name them, but still in their same positions inside the U.S. Attorney's Office, they're still in those positions. So Leah Foley hasn't been able to get rid of them yet, hasn't made the move to get rid of them. So we'll see. Does she have the strength to actually stand up to these people? Because they were part of the corruption. It was the first assistant U.S. attorney that Josh Levy left behind when he left office on January 31st of this 21st of this past year. And it was January 31st that this assistant U.S. attorney told David Yannetti, or told both sides, and David Yannetti reported this at the next hearing, that the federal investigation into the Karen Reed case was officially ongoing. Naturally, Yannetti was eager to report that, right? But it wasn't true. And Leah Foley wasn't going to put up with that. So pretty quickly, I think it was the next hearing, maybe if I remember right, it was February 8th. Hank Brennan now reported that it was over. I could be off on the dates on that last date. But in any case, it wasn't long before Leah Foley stepped in to clean that up and say, no, it's over. And by the way, the first assistant U.S. attorney resigned. So she was obviously forced to step down. So at least Foley had the strength to stand up to her. But there are other stronger lawyers in that department that are still corrupted by Josh Levy and his maneuvers, and still trying to obscure what happened. They're a barrier to getting to the truth. And the witnesses are fighting that right now. I think they're going to win in the long run. But unfortunately, having these people there still presents a barrier. So we'll see. Let's look through my notes, see what else we got here. Let's look through my notes. I already said all that stuff. All right, so Leah Foley seems to be doing the right thing, but I guess we won't know for sure until she has to show the courage to do what's right when it's something that might cost her something. Now, there's a little bit of that here when you're taking on people around you within the office that you risk losing their loyalty, these hacks in the office that used to be loyal to Josh. So I don't know, but you know, it's more complicated than that. But we don't know if she's actually had to make a truly courageous decision yet. But there's promise here that she might be someone that's willing to do that. We'll see. She's certainly a Republican in Massachusetts. So most of the people, the overwhelming number of people in that U.S. Attorney's office are going to be liberal, progressive Democrats. And so I don't say this I'm saying this in a completely nonpartisan way, but to be in that situation, she's in the minority in that office. And she made clear from the beginning she was going to enforce Trump's policies in trying to secure illegal immigration, trying to get rid of it and trying to secure the border. So most of those people in that office would be against her on that. So she's shown the courage that she can at least stand up to these people on that. But we'll see what else can go in. So why am I talking today about truth and integrity? Like I said, a lot of it goes to the new launch, but I'm an introspective person by nature. So a week from Monday, we'll be relaunching in many ways my several channels here. I am producing a whole new format. One which will create a lot of demanding work for me. So is it worth it? We'll see. We're going to do shows every weeknight at 8 p.m. Now, on these shows, I will seldom, if ever, be alone. Co-hosts, guests, new reporters, new cases, new material. We're starting from what has again become small numbers, so we have to build up, and I think we will. But, growth here will always be limited by our commitment to being fair and objective, to cover things in a both sides kind of way. Now, it's just human nature that most people prefer the comfort of only hearing things that support what they already believe. And they don't want any variation on that. They like the echo chamber. It's human nature. So if I'm doing my job right, I'm pissing everybody off at one point or another. Now, the really good hardcore members here, that loyal members of Yellow Cottage Tales that that you guys engage and chat with each other and that reach out to me, they appreciate that. Even though I might piss them off sometimes too, but they appreciate it because they know I'm always going to try to give them that fairness and that objectivity, that's something that I aim for. And the new people on my team have been chosen because some cases I've worked with them for a while, like Jen Coffenaffer or Margaret McLean, and they are the same way. They say they're exactly the same way. Everybody else that I work with, Drunken Turkeys, they all believe in fairness and impartiality. They all believe in reaching for the truth no matter what the cost is. So we're going to do that. And any new people we bring on, and we are bringing on new people, they have already tested as much as I can to this point that they think that way. But we'll be watching them closely, and if they in any way show any lack of commitment themselves to those values, we'll move on from them. But so far, all signs are really positive that they won't be like that at all. So, any new investigation that we're going to begin from a both sides kind of way of looking at it. That's the surest way to reach the truth. Now, eventually, it doesn't mean you're equally both sides about a case to the end. It just means you're always looking objectively at each piece of evidence and trying to weigh it in from various possible angles as to what it might mean, instead of trying to force every piece of evidence to fit the puzzle of your conclusions that you've already made. That's a mistake, and it's something that's natural for all of us to do. And the only way to not do it is to just really make an extra effort to not do it. You have to be very conscious about it. And it's something you have to strive for. You have to be on guard against your own biases. And things like confirmation bias is a huge problem. And it's something we all have to look to root out at all the times. Now, these other channels, and not all of them on the Karen Reed side, a couple on this side too, that's not what they do. So whatever sources you like, you have to ask yourself, do you trust that they'll report things that don't fit the narrative their audience wants? If they learn something that contradicts their previous positions, do you trust them to tell you the truth or to report this stuff, to report what's new, to report what they learned? On the Karen Reed case, there are YouTube channels out there that are more or less on the same side as me, but I don't consider them any more honest than FKR channels. They allow their personal obsessions and petty grievances to determine their reporting, even to the point of saying things that are absolutely false. Now, I will never let this channel fall into that. As a kid on the schoolyard playing in sports, I was the kid on the other, it could be annoying, on the other team. I was the kid that the other team knew would tell the truth. You don't have referees out there in those schoolyard games. And a big argument breaks out. Was he out or safe? Was it inbounds or out of bounds? And I was a quarterback or one of the main players on the other team usually. And but eventually you have to end the argument. You don't have a referee. You don't want to lose your whole recess. It would end because the other team would come to me and say, all right, what happened? And they would accept it because they knew I wouldn't lie. And this actually went on to my modern adult life too. When I played in leagues, umpires and refs tended to treat me the same way. They knew I wouldn't lie. So it's a fault of mine, right? It's an annoying thing. Some people don't prefer that. Some people prefer that your loyalty to your team be so absolute that they can count on you to lie if they need to. I'm sorry. That's not my nature. I don't want to look at it that way. So the Karen Reed coverage did not change me. Those were things that I already had, but it's put the values that I think are important into more focus because I've seen how so many other channels operate, and it highlights how rare integrity actually is, which it is discouraging, but it's reality. Like I said, I think the people in our audience prefer the truth. They respect integrity. The new people joining my team feel the same way. So I hope you guys will stick with us and give it a shot. Let me just poke in the chat for a second, and then I'll go on to that video that I don't know. I think it was maybe a review of my book or something like that. Most of these reviews of the book, I don't even think they open it, but So let's see if anybody's got any questions in chat, and then I'll go to that. So Mark Jude, good to see you again, Mark. Haven't seen you in a while. Kevin has always been and always will be the man when it comes to accurate, honest. No, see again, and I thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. I'm glad you recognize that. And again, I want to say it doesn't mean I'm always right. No way does it mean that. Doesn't mean every fact that I report turns out to be true. I try my best to make sure what I give you is the truth, make sure it's verified. And I have learned a lot over the last couple of years about that, how to verify sources and things like that. So I try. But again, nobody's perfect. But what you do know is that as soon as I learn something that I've told my audience, as soon as I learn that thing turned out to be not true, I will correct it loudly and as much as needed to correct the record. Do the other sources do that? And I'm talking about all the free Karen Reed channels, Turtle Boy, and I'm also talking about those 2 unnamed channels allegedly on our side. Do they correct the truth? To my knowledge, they don't. I don't really listen to them. It doesn't seem to be in their makeup. They hide behind fake names sometimes, and they report things that are easily disproved by anybody even just doesn't know all the anybody who's just watching the videos on the surface. They can quickly realize that they're not telling the truth. And but they go on doing it because of their own obsessions. No, we don't do that here. You know that even, for example, let's say something was being reported that was patently untrue and damaging to Aiden Kearney. Well, if I had contradictory information on that, especially if that was a report that I had helped spread or in any way contribute to, I would use that to correct the record. And I have done that before. It's easy to always jump to the conclusion that the guy you disagree with, the guy that you know is a bad guy, that he has automatically done something heinous. He infiltrated a school bus and harassed the kids or something like that or whatever. It's easy to try to demonize your enemy. We all have to be on guard for that. And so you got to try to be rational as you hear these reports to make sure they're true and do your best to correct them. Molly Killarney says, that's always one of my favorite names. I think I've told you, Molly, I wanted to open a bar called Killarney. My ancestors are from the county of Killarney in Ireland. And she says, like coming home, Kevin, so good to see you and hear your sage words. So, they're only I think the only thing that makes the word sage is I always try to be honest with people. So it's other than that, they're no more sage than any one of the rest of us here. And the only other difference is I bought a mic and set up a channel, but I think all of us here think the same way. And Robert gave us a super sticker. Thank you very much, Robert. Very much appreciated. Go back quickly to live. Brittany has a question. Let's see. Do you think Karen will get any charges with the new federal grand jury situation? Okay, that's a very good question. Now, at this point, let me turn off this air conditioner. Sorry for being distracted. The air conditioner was getting me cool. All right. At this point, there's no indication that will be the case. However, it's possible. And the key thing is whether this grand juror leaked anything to Karen or to her team. At this point, there's no evidence of that. The feds are going to sit on that kind of stuff. So, that's they're going to, that's the nature of how they operate. Most of the time, the feds operate in darkness, in secrecy. Most of the time, the feds don't give information out. They just get information. That's why part of what they were doing with Karen Reed was so egregiously wrong. There's all kinds of evidence that instead of it being a one-way street, it was a two-way street, and the feds were feeding them information. So we'll see what truth comes out on that eventually. But so will it turn out to be the case that this leaking grand juror was leaking directly to Karen or her team? That would be pretty big news. there are indications that she may be a cooperating witness with the feds right now. One of the indications of that is that she got a pretty cushy deal. She was sentenced to, if the judge agrees to it, she'll be sentenced to 1 day served, which was basically just her being processed and coming in, stuff like that. She wouldn't have done any jail time. That's a pretty cushy deal. And the judge has not officially accepted that yet. What does that mean? I'm no expert on this stuff, but I believe the judge wants to see more of the details of what this cooperation is, if there is cooperation. And it's a strong indicator that there must be cooperation, because otherwise, why wouldn't they've had 2 hearings on this now. So why wouldn't the feds just, if all they had was that, hey, she's made amends and we've accepted it, why wouldn't they just go with that? Or just reject that? The judge didn't do either. He just postponed the hearing till September, pushed the can down the road a little bit. Why would he do that? Well, again, I think that because there's action that's still being taken on the part of this witness. That's the only thing that would make sense. And she's also had some special treatment where she's ushered out a side door that normally witnesses are not ushered out of. So I think it's an interesting case. We'll have to keep our eye on it. We'll see what happens. And so at some point, maybe at that next hearing where the judge will have to make a decision on whether to accept this, maybe we'll learn more, or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe the judge just accepts it and the judge is satisfied that he's learned more, but doesn't make it public. So I don't know. Jay says, where is your witness, Kevin? So the witness backed out minutes before recording. And the witness who had reached out to me, not the other way around. I never reach out to anybody of these witnesses. I don't like to bother people. They had reached out to me, and for their own reasons, they said that somebody had convinced them to not do the show. So I didn't ask any more information. It's their business. What's best for them is what we all want anyways, right? For them to get back to normal lives. I believe that the interview was crucial to doing that, actually, because to get back to your normal life, you want to somehow change the narrative so not everybody in your town looks at you as though you're a murderer or part of some murder conspiracy. And the only way to do that is a plan to get the truth out. And I was working hard on doing that, but somebody talked the witness into that wasn't a good idea. I don't know who talked him into it, but there's a solid faction now advising these witnesses to just follow along with the civil suits. But I wish they would understand that the goal of a civil suit, at least on the part of the lawyers, has nothing to do with changing a narrative. The goal of a civil suit has nothing to do with wanting to alleviate the suffering of the witnesses. In fact, the opposite, because the more the witnesses suffer, the more that translates into money if they win the lawsuit. So I think I would advise that they be a little bit skeptical about what the lawyers tell them. Lawyers may not have the same objective that they have. They want to change the narrative. The lawyers want to win the lawsuit. And that's understandable. They're putting up a lot of money. So again, but I don't know what the advice was that she had, and it may have been different, and it may have been much better than what I just presented here. So, it's important to give them the room to do what they think is best for them and their families. And one consistent thing here is that every witness that I've spoken to or even heard about is that their focus has been on their families. They want their families to be able to go to school and not be harassed. They want their kids to be able to go into a store and not be smeared as connected to a murderer or part of a murdering family or something like that. That's 100% everything I've ever heard from any of the families involved here. So they have the right to follow their own wisdom, their own counsel on what's the best way to achieve that. So I am not somebody that may not have the best. I'm not a lawyer, right? So who am I? I'm nothing. I'm an old bartender. So I may not have the best advice or wisdom on that. I could be wrong. I could say, and I will say, that my advice relative, for instance, how the prosecution should do things, both in the first trial and the second trial, proved to be largely spot on based on what we're hearing from the witnesses, based on the results. I'm sorry, on the based on the jurors that have spoken, and based on the results. And we don't know with 100% certainty because only a small part of the jurors have spoken, and they seem to have been influenced by other things before the trial. But still, nonetheless, I think my advice on how to proceed on this prosecution, even though I am not even a lawyer, let alone a former prosecutor or anything like that, seemed to be good advice to follow a simple narrative, to focus on things that are not open to interpretation, hard facts, hard logic. When you have a jury of 12 people, if you have a jury of 3 people and they have to agree to something unanimously beyond a reasonable doubt, it's going to be a challenge because you got 3 people that witness an accident and they're all going to have 3 different views of it. And so you really have to stick to things that are not open to multiple interpretations and build your arguments entirely on those things as much as possible. That was my advice. But let's not go down that road too far. Again, the only thing I really should be advising is how to make the best Bloody Mary in the world. And beyond that, if you want to tune out my advice, everybody, that it's probably good advice for me to tell you, tune out my other advice because I'm not qualified. So, all right, Mark, again, thank you. All the FKR freaks are in love and rooted for the alcoholic, drunk driving murderer too. Is that the M for murder? She got away with it because people like them were on the jury. That's the truth. I think that's not the whole truth, Mark. I think if you had a hung jury, that might be the whole truth. If you had a hung jury, you might have a few people that came onto the jury with their minds made up. It's a little tougher this way. You got 12 people that actually voted to acquit. Now, no doubt, a few of the jurors that were on there that were ardent FKR and may have been influenced by this long before the trial began, they may have been the strongest voices in the room, and they may have swayed some of those other people. But nonetheless, I think, to me, it's still fair to say that if the case, there were mistakes in the case. In many ways, the prosecution was brilliant. The performance of the closing remarks by Prosecutor Hank Brennan was beyond brilliant. I mean, textbooks should be written about just that closing remarks. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I never thought that the case for second degree could be made so convincingly. And he did, from memory, not even reading it. It was impressive. But there were mistakes made, and to some of this, was it because there was too much material? Was it because some of the assistant prosecutors didn't point things out to Hank? I don't know. There was obviously the famous mistake about the shirt, but that would have cost the confidence of the jury to some degree. When he misidentified the holes in the shirt, he didn't realize they had been created by the testing. So some of the holes, I don't know. It's some of these mistakes are normal. How much do they make a difference? Who can really say? For me, I think there was maybe a lot of people. Well, I don't want to say it, but I think simplicity was always the key, and the statements were to some degree. So Karen's statements in the media and in the documentary, which those clips that were used, were to some degree very effective, but to another degree also overly relied on too much because they didn't seem to be important to a single juror. So they end up being a distraction. And I don't think a distraction is ever something you really want to risk doing with a jury, not if you're the prosecution. If you're the defense, yes, but not if you're the prosecution. If you want to if you're prosecuting someone, you want that lean, clean, tight, bulletproof case that focuses just on the data and the logic and the possibilities or impossibilities. I think that's what you want to do. And I think the prosecution the second time did a much better job of that than the first time, but at the end of the day, it still wasn't as clean or as neat as it could have been. So, and again, some of these mistakes had nothing to do with the prosecution. So, first of all, just look at the nature of the case. You have no witness. You have no video. You have a hit and run where the victim was sideswiped, just barely clipped by the vehicle going in reverse. The damage to the vehicle is minimal. The damage to John's body is minimal. Other than the scratches on his right arm and a slight abrasion on his right knee, there are no injuries below the neck. And furthermore, the state claims that the injury to the head was formed by it hitting the ground, by John hitting the ground. So that's that's a difficult hand for a prosecution to have to start with right away, right there. It's a difficult place to have forensic data. No sound. Sorry about that. There is a mute button there that my finger accidentally touched. Sorry about that. We back now? All right, good. It's always a challenge holding these mics. Now I know where the mute button is. I can barely see it up there. So I forget where it cut me off. I think not too long ago, but you have to make the case to the jury in a bulletproof way before the defense starts calling their witnesses. So, that's hard to do, right? And then obviously, but if it's not really, really powerfully made before that by the witnesses, by the prosecution's witnesses, now when the defense starts calling their witnesses, you're going to start creating that doubt very effectively. And once that doubt sets in, no matter how brilliant the closing remarks arguments are that tie it all together, it might be too late. And that seems to have been what happened here. So that was a problem. I think that I personally, and I said this at the time, and Kate, we always go back and forth privately on the phone about things, and sometimes she can sway me, sometimes I can sway her. She knew that I believed that Dr. Welcher, but I believe this before the verdict, that Dr. Welcher cost them the case. And, but she did convince me that I shouldn't say it. So I really didn't say it on the air. And I don't think it would have been, I still agree with that decision. I don't think it would have been to any benefit for me to say that on the air. So I don't think it was needed for me to say it. I don't think it would have helped. So, but I do think his work on this case and his testimony, his style, I don't think it helped the prosecution. The big thing is it's a pretty goddamn unforgivable mistake to have put onto a slide an estimation of the time of the collision that was that was pretty far off from when the other data showed the collision had to be. yes, it was within the margin of error still, like the 1 minute margin of error that was established there, or the 28-second, I forget which one, the 28-second margin of error. I think it was just barely within the 28-second margin of error, but it was pretty far off. And and if they had just used the chat, the graphic that I had Chick from the Bricks help me make, if they had just had that if he had just seen that, if he had just been given that, then Dr. Welcher never would have put that in a slide, because that showed what the other guy that worked for the company, Dr. Welcher's company there. God, I forgot the name of some of these people, and even the name of the company. Since it's now been a whole month, right? What was the other guy that I think he had a French name that begins with a B? He went back and got a more accurate time on this. Burgess, thank you, Foghorn. But I had got that from very simple means, just by looking at Trooper Garino's data, and that really showed within a few seconds what time Karen's 3-point turn was. And then we know from the vehicle data that John was struck about 8 minutes and 8 seconds after that. And so that would put that time about 30 seconds away from when Dr. Welcher put his time on that slide. There's no excuse for doing that. And you can't undo that damage. If this was an argument not in front of a jury, Aperture, thank you, Ken. Let's say this was, instead of this being an argument in front of a jury, this was an argument in front of a scientific committee. You arguing a point of science, and that committee had to weigh all the best scientific evidence and come up with conclusions. Well, then Dr. Welcher would, the totality of what Aperture put together would have been fine. And those scientists on the committee would have looked it through, and they said, yes, he had the margin of error there. And over the period of months, they refined the data, and what they came up with was very accurate at the end of the day. Yes, had they been testifying not in front of a jury, but to a scientific panel, it would have been successful. But they weren't. They were testifying to a jury, something that Dr. Welcher and Aperture does for a living. All right, it's a big part of what they do. So to make that kind of mistake is a big blunder. And I felt like that was a blunder that had the potential to cost them the case, because that went a long way to creating doubt. You're getting anything that takes you away from the necessity of simplicity. Any way that takes you away from that simplicity, that makes things more complicated. If you now have to make a more complicated argument to the jury, especially after the waters get muddied by the defense experts, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. So that was a big blunder. So, and that has nothing to do with the prosecution. That was just, you can't anticipate. You hire these experts, they have impeccable reputations, and they're qualified, and yet they still make that kind of mistake. That's not the prosecution's fault. They're stuck with it, and they have to do their best to live with it. They're stuck with it. So, and some of the other mistakes that happened in this case, such as the weird way the Sallyport videos kept appearing almost right up to the second trial, new videos kept coming out. This seems to be just bureaucratic nightmare stuff where things were misplaced in the wrong drawer because they didn't seem very important at the time. But it's still problematic, and it has nothing to do with the prosecution and the way it was done. Pam says, Kevin, it was a high-stress situation. With the chat moved, I didn't see the rest of it, but I'm not sure what was the high-stress situation. But sorry, sometimes the chat window moves too fast. Okay, so to me, there were things like that were well beyond the prosecution. It had nothing to do with the prosecutor's strategy or things that they did that really handicapped this case and made it different, and should have made us prepared for a bad result here. So we had to be ready for it. And I just think maybe even given all this, the very best we could have hoped for here was a hung jury in these circumstances, especially when you factor in the fact that there were bound to be some jurors planted. I don't want to say planted, that's too strong a word, but jurors that got onto that jury that knowingly had already made up their mind and had an agenda. So, all right, let's go into the video that this book review did of me. I haven't heard the video yet, but I just looked at the description and I'm already like not impressed by her writing or anything. It's incredible. So, all right, here it is. Let's go first to how she describes what this video is going to be. Again, the name of her channel is I Don't Belong Here with Samantha Benigno. And she says, former Karen Reed insider Kevin Linehan, who recently released a book on the topic, lays out in his case, which he alleges to be. All right, first of all, she's changed this since I first left her. I left a comment on this. Oh no, not exactly. No, yeah, it's still no. The comment's still missing. So, I don't want to be nitpicky about something like this because sometimes you're writing up these descriptions really fast. But former Karen Reed insider Kevin Linehan, who recently released, now there's supposed to be a comma after Kevin Linehan, lays out his case, which he alleges to be void of emotion and based on logic. Again, a missing comma here, for why Karen Reed is guilty. How does someone who used to be a supporter turn? Good question, right? She says. I'm still waiting to find out. Well, the question is comically laughable. Why does someone who used to be a supporter turn? Okay, I would not say I was ever a supporter. I definitely was never a Karen Reed insider. No one's ever suggested I was. Whoever called me an insider? Nobody. Nick Rocco's the insider. Turtle Boy's the insider. I was never an insider on this case. I've never had any communications with Karen Reed or anybody from her inner circle. Closest would be people from on the outer rings of that circle, such as Sean McDonough. I am definitely not a supporter. I was someone who leaned towards believing that there might be a cover-up here. Now, we're talking back in the early weeks after Turtle Boy's story first broke, because I looked at things, seemed interesting. So if Jen McCabe had, in fact, made that Google search for How Long to Die in the Cold at 2:27, was that the time was 2:27 a.m., then yeah, that would be really suspicious to me. Really suspicious to me. I can't imagine any innocent explanation for it. So at that time, not knowing anything about data, when I believed that there was something to that, I was like, maybe there's something here, and maybe some of the other odd things, therefore, must be more meaningful. Change to the Red Sox. I have a different game on. I've got the Phillies on, but the Red Sox should be starting up very soon. I think actually it looks like they were going to start at 8:30. So the Red Sox already started. So I missed the first inning, looks like. All right. So that's where I was. I was someone that early on thought that maybe there was a cover up here, but I never stopped asking hard questions. And right away, in one of those early hearings in June, when Lally said that the state has hired an independent forensic data expert, and this was Jessica Hyde at the time, and that person had concluded that, and she had a highly technical explanation for it, that no search was made at 2:27 for How Long to Die in the Cold. Now, I didn't take the position that she was right, no. But now when I said, well, maybe data is not data. Maybe this stuff is in dispute. You're going to, at the very least, you're now going to have experts on both sides that they're going to have different conclusions. So this put me back firmly on the fence. Okay. And that just had me asking harder and harder questions. So when she says, how does someone who used to be a supporter turn? Well, the answer, sweetheart, is simple. I kept asking questions, and when better evidence came in, eventually, I had different conclusions. And at first, those conclusions leaned a certain way. So at first, the conclusions lean one way. Then after asking hard questions and having some things debunked, now the conclusions started leaning another way. But then over a little bit more time, as more evidence came in, now those conclusions became more strong than just leaning the other way. They started to become very conclusive. But again, that was just based on the evidence. I don't know what's so mysterious about this I don't belong here. And somebody actually gave her a master's for saying something. And she says things like that. It's really strange. Lays out a case which he alleges to be void of emotion and based on logic. Yeah, I absolutely allege that. I insist on that. And anybody who follows me and has followed my thinking on this case or on any case knows that's how I think. So good luck if you don't agree with that. All right, so let me just play let's play a little bit of this and see how it goes.
Welcome. So today I wanted to talk about something very, very briefly. Some of you are probably way ahead of me on this. All along my journey with the Karen Reed stuff has evolved, let's say, right? And more recently, I did not know the Plevin reference. I did not know who that was. So I would hear Turtle Boy say it, but just ignored it because I didn't know who he was talking about. And then I don't know what I saw. I saw an interview somewhere, and this guy I didn't recognize was talking about Brian Higgins and that he had interviewed him. And I didn't get much farther than that before I realized that he had written a book, and that in that book, he talks about these interviews where he talks about what he learned from these interviews.
Okay, so what she obviously watched was, let's call it an interview if you want, with that absolute idiot, the Broken Baker. His people had reached out to me and they said, we'd like to read your book on the channel. Do we have your permission? Which was a stupid question because the book is basically run by the publisher and there is an audio version of the book. They're not going to, I don't have the ability to give permission to do that, nor would I, but the publisher is definitely not going to give permission from someone like the Broken Baker to read out excerpts from the book. And Broken Baker had no interest in learning anything or getting to the truth on this. He was basically pandering to the free Karen Reed crowd to try to get out, to try to smear the book and looking for excuses to do that. And he thought he detected one here. And he actually was, though he drew the wrong conclusion, he actually was somewhat astute for picking this up. All right. So what he picked up was my language in describing certain things about Brian Higgins, his background, his motives, and things and stuff like that. It sounded as though I was something sounded off to him about it, and he felt like I was trying to do some literary. I don't remember the way he put it, but I think he thought I was basically using some kind of false literary device in order to make it seem like I was in the head of Brian Higgins based on my speculations. That is not at all what happened. What happened was I did meet with Brian Higgins, had lunch with him, had like a 3-hour lunch, and I liked him. I found him to be honest with me. And subsequent, over the next couple months, spoke to him frequently on the phone. And now Brian hasn't spoken to me for months, and it may even be because of this Broken Baker interview. Now, I was in an awkward situation. Brian wanted me to report certain things about his history as a firefighter, his wartime service, and then as particularly an incident that he was involved with for the ATF when he was involved in a shootout and had to save the life of his partner who got shot multiple times. And it was a little bit awkward for me because he wanted me to report this as though I just did all this research on my own. But that was not the case. So I was able, once he brought this up, verify a lot of it with links. but also to a large degree, the information was coming straight from Brian Higgins. So I sent a copy of the book to one of his lawyers, and his lawyer has also written true crime books, and he's a great guy, turned out to be a great guy. And he read the book and he loved the book. He was like, this is one of the best true crime books I've ever read. He really loved the book. And I said, well, that's great, but I want you to look at this to make, for any issues with Brian. And he says, well, the thing is Brian doesn't want you mentioning that you ever spoke. And so this was not long before I submitted the final manuscript, but I tweaked the language to make it seem, to just take out the part where it completely doesn't mention that I spoke to Brian Higgins. But to me, it should have been apparent to anybody reading it that I did speak to him. And I just wasn't quite saying it. In fact, that's how I told people that how I handled this. I felt like I really felt it was better for both me and Brian if I just told the truth, that I met Brian and he told me certain things and these are my impressions on the veracity of it. But at the end of the day, they didn't seem to want that. So I left it so what you see in the book now is how it came out. And so this broken Baker astutely sensed that something was a little off in the way I was describing it. And the truth was, I had actually talked to him. And in that moment, on the interview with Baker, I chose to reveal the truth. Because not that I had lied before, I never said I didn't talk to him, but I chose to just say, yes, I did talk to him. I never said, I definitely never even implied that I didn't talk to him. So it was never anything untruthful. I just became more truthful. Sorry, I have to try a cough drop for a little bit. Getting a little stuff in my mouth. All right. So that should have been a big reveal. That's something that a good interviewer would have jumped all over and said, oh my God, even if you don't believe me. So either I'm lying in that moment on his show about having spoken and had lunch with Brian Higgins, or I did have lunch with Brian Higgins and nobody had seen this guy. He was like Kaiser Sose for a couple of years, right? He still is. And that should have been a big deal. He should have jumped all over that, but he didn't, because he doesn't have the instincts of a reporter, and he's not someone that is after the truth. That's the difference. He was after a gotcha moment, and he had already made up in his mind, in his head, that I was somehow making something up. And he just totally even neglected to seize on this. But this woman here with the, however she obtained these letters next to her name, apparently jumped on that and took some information from it. But, so you're getting your information from a guy who's not credible and who's just an FKR guy. So you need to get broader sources if you're truly trying to evolve your understanding of a case.
Views, I guess, with Proctor and Higgins or whoever. I also learned that he started out a Karen Reed supporter and then kind of, somehow drifted over to the other side. What I did do was read the book. I am somebody who, when I'm curious or interested,
somehow drifted. That's called the evidence. That's called analyzing the logic. Is nothing mysterious about that.
In something, I am going to go all in. Like, I'm an obsessive. That's maybe the understatement of all time. Certainly that affected my life in unhelpful ways when I was much, much younger. And that's just how I am, right? Like, I'm going to go all extreme, all in. I wanted to know more about what he knew, not so much about him. And so I was driving, I immediately found the book, and I figured that it would have to be like really big stuff. If you're somebody who starts out a Karen Reed supporter, and then you find, you somehow come to the conclusion that she's guilty, in my mind, that means you must have like really solid evidence. You must have seen or heard something that was so extreme, so over the.
I had that evidence. If you actually read the book, the whole book, you would have seen it. And the evidence that I laid out was the way I hoped the prosecution would. Simple, irrefutable. So easy a caveman can understand it.
The top that, you know, it would be compelling for anyone. So I started reading and waiting and waiting and waiting.
So you wanted me to reveal all this, what, in the first chapter? Is that how you expected the book to go? Look, I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to go with this here because this is not a serious person. But I left a comment on her channel, which it already had 929 comments, and this video was made a few months ago. I was only aware of it this week. So I'm not surprised that she didn't respond to the comment. A lot of people, once a video gets to a certain age and it already has 929 comments on it, she may just stop responding to comments. But I offered to go on her channel. If you're interested in the truth, darling, if you're interested in the nice, simple arguments that I lay out in the book, but if you don't have the patience to read a book, I can lay these arguments out for you in 5 minutes. Not just me. There are plenty of us here can do it. Kate definitely can do it. But if you're interested in the truth, you can listen to these arguments, and they're irrefutable. They're simple. If any of the jurors will listen to this right now, I'm not going to go over the arguments right now. We've said it many times on the channel. But if you're interested in the truth, you can reach out to me publicly. You can reach out to me privately. I'll just tell you on the phone. I happy to talk to someone like a juror who is interested in the truth and just wants to know. Give me a call. If you're interested in the truth, I will lay out the case for you based on evidence that can't be refuted and logic that can't be refuted. And there's different ways to lay out that argument. You could just go back to Hank's closing arguments too. But maybe you want to hear something a little bit different. So I'll give you something slightly different.
And not only did I not get to some point in this book where I heard anything compelling against Karen Reed or any information that seemed to incriminate, I heard new things that I'd never heard before about why she's not guilty. Look.
Okay, so the book was thorough, and I laid out all the main points that the conspiracy people had floated through. Basically, Karen's team floating this through Turtle Boy for a long time. Now, this was Karen Reed 101 stuff. Pretty much most people that have followed this case closely knew these things. But I wanted to put them out there for the people in the public that didn't know all of them. And so this person obviously didn't know much about the case. So she was hearing these things for the first time. But many people in the Free Karen Reed armies, they certainly knew them. They hadn't been hearing them for the first time. In fact, most of these things came out on day one when Turtle Boy broke his story that was hand-fed to him by Karen and her defense team, talking directly to him dozens of times in that week. So it was, I think, April 18th, 2023. That's when his first blog article came out, and then days later when he started doing shows. But in that very first blog, almost all of this stuff is already there. Dog bites and wounds on Colin Albert's hands, and it's all there. Oh, Red Sox have bases loaded, one out with Connor Wong up. Oh, that's unfortunate. Connor Wong, damn. Well, there's one out, so we can hope he doesn't hit into a double play. And amazingly, the pitcher starts out with a ball. You should just throw three pitches down the middle of the plate for this dude. Never start out with a ball against this hitter. He's terrible. He was a decent hitter last year. Let me just watch one more pitch, and then I will. He throws another ball. So it's now 2-0, bases loaded, against the ninth hitter in the lineup, the worst hitter on the team. It's batting 171 right now. So let me watch one more pitch. Now it's getting interesting. Will they let Connor swing on this pitch? He did swing, and all right. So he swung, hit a weak ground ball to the third baseman. The third baseman picked off the lead runner at home plate. And then there was an attempted double play throw to first base, but Connor Wong was safe. So now you still have the bases loaded now with 2 outs. So at least if Roman Anthony's been leading off. So let's see if Roman Anthony is up. He is. Roman Anthony's up. You don't usually have a kid that big or that young in the leadoff spot, but he's there because he very rarely strikes out and he makes great contact, has great at bats. All right, let me get away from. Sorry to give you my sports interlude here. So again, I don't know how far to go with this because this person isn't very serious.
Am I emotional about this case? Absolutely, because I really believe wholeheartedly that the person who murdered John O'Keefe should pay. That is my investment. It is not that I feel for Karen Reed because I am like her. I don't like that an innocent person is being thrown under the bus here. But my investment is I would like.
All right. So she's admitted she doesn't know most of the facts about the case. But yet here she is. She's already concluded that Karen is an innocent person being thrown under the bus. Does she even see how bad her arguments are? But this is the problem with people that have limited abilities. They don't see that kind of thing. It's pretty obvious to most normal people, but she's completely unself-aware.
Like to see whoever murdered John O'Keefe pay for that act. That is my personal investment.
That is not your investment, because if that was your investment, you would wait to get all of the truth, all of the most important arguments, and then determine if Karen Reed was likely innocent or inframed or possibly guilty. The idea of Karen possibly being guilty doesn't even seem to have presented itself as something even to consider.
I also believe that Karen Reed is the fall guy and was a really easy target. So let me get back to
why was she an
what
easy
my point of
target?
this was.
I mean, it's a hit and run case. As it turned out, it was very difficult. It would have been not only difficult, but as it turned out, impossible to have planted that evidence. So an easy target? No, you don't really understand very much. I'm sorry, young lady. What's her name again? I already forgot her name. Oh, Samantha. Okay.
I'm reading this book. Let me tell you about the book. The book is called Storm of Suspicion by Kevin Lenahan. But I want to go through and speak to some of the points that were particularly frustrating for me. Okay. But these are not in any particular order. First, if you're going to report on this story, you have to have all of the small, stupid little details right. Because if I am going to purchase this book, the truth is, the only people that are probably going to purchase this are people that care this much. People like me. People that want to know more than is already available in.
Okay, what petty little thing is she going to find that I got wrong? I think Broken Baker tried to say that I accidentally got the date wrong. This is so petty.
4 documentaries, major network documentaries, that is already available from all of the YouTube videos and testimony and endless and just ridiculous amounts of information all over the internet, all the court filings.
All right, get to a point,
right?
Sam.
So the only people that are going to read this are people like me that are like really that desperate for information. And for me, the reason that I wanted to read the book is because I wanted information about the other side. I want information, personal information about the character of Brian Higgins.
Get to a point, sweetheart.
Of Michael Proctor and of anybody inside on that team, the McCabe's, the Alberts. I want to know who these people are. Why? Because that's who I am. Because I'm a psychologist and because that's what I want to know. Because I want information. I want to know as much information as I possibly can have on anything.
I see no evidence of this,
that I
but
care about.
go ahead.
And
Please,
I will go
honey, say something.
to the depths of hell and back to get it. And I want to say, like, in the first 5 minutes, he's just going through some facts about the case and stupid little things he gets wrong. For example, he talks about the 911 call that Carrie Roberts places to the police department, to the Canton Police Department. And
That's not true. Jen McCabe placed the call.
Tells us that when Carrie calls, she reports to them that Karen, his girlfriend, called and she said that she had dropped him.
All right. See, she's confused here. Carrie Roberts called the Canton police. I don't know if it was a 911 call or if it was just like the regular number they have. But yeah, but Kerry did call the police after Karen's call, just when Karen said John's dead, maybe hit by a plow. So
him off at the house at 34 Fairview, and then she hasn't seen him since. And he never came home. She dropped him off at the house, and then he never came home. Now that's not what happened, right? I mean, if you have heard the 911 call, then you yourself know. And I covered
all right. She's going to be confused here.
this a lot.
She
so
doesn't know what the
do
hell she's talking about.
That is not what Carrie believed at the time, because that's not what Karen believed at the time. Both of them, before they found John and before they met up with Jen McCabe, believed that Karen got in a fight with him at the waterfall and left him there, right? So she thought, up until she spoke to Jen McCabe, who said, no, we saw you out in front of the house. You did come to 34 Fairview. You must have dropped him off and left, right? So it's not until Karen hears that and Carrie hears that from Jen that either of those two know that that is what happened, okay? Now that seems small. Am I being nitpicky? Definitely.
What are you even talking about? Of course, Kerry would believe that if the only information she has in that moment is what Karen told her. I don't even, what is it that you think I'm saying here?
Well, why would I be nitpicky? This case is about the details. And if you're going to write a book to try to give to us those details, they really matter, and you better get them right. So the first criticism I have here is get the details right. Now, that's one example. You can listen for yourself. You can read it for yourself if you want more examples, but there are plenty. My second criticism, he tries to say that why would Michael Proctor plant evidence? What would be his motive? What could possibly be his motive? How about 16 hours in, when we see that in his text messages to his buddies, he tells us he knows he's not going to have the evidence that he needs to make her pay. Serious charges on the girl. And then when...
Okay, I don't think she understands what motive is. Okay, what she just described here does not in any way attribute any kind of a motive to Michael Proctor. Even if you take her version that Michael Proctor's texts are indicating that there's something they won't be able to prove. I'm not, without having the text in front of me, I don't remember specifically all of what she's saying here. Because she doesn't have the full text chain here. But when Michael Proctor said, that's another animal we won't be able to prove, what was he talking about? I don't actually know here. They arrived at the house together, got into an argument, and she was driving left. So are they trying to prove intent? That she intentionally struck him? Well, that is going to be a difficult thing to prove. So, but none of this indicate if that's what they're talking about. And again, she doesn't provide the previous text here. But none of that goes to motive. Motive is, Michael would explain why Michael Proctor had some reason to want to see Karen Read framed. And that doesn't happen here. And actually, I have to say, I don't really, maybe Kate can check in on this if Kate's still here. I don't even know if this doesn't feel like an accurate representation of Michael Proctor's texts. But I assume you guys are out to make it out. But I assume you guys, this would be a friend talking to Michael, saying, I assume you guys are out to make it cut and dry because it involves cops, right? And another friend says something stinks. And Michael Proctor says, yeah, but there will be some serious charges brought on the girl. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't really. These accurates don't suggest to me. I don't. This is not how I remember these comments. So I'll look to see if anybody else has anything on that. Does this seem accurate to you guys? Do you guys believe? Can you guys check this for me? I'm looking to see response. Is what she's posing there? I don't recall hearing these being emphasized in the trial. So no one there's no one is saying that these that those are not accurate. So most people are saying that it's accurate. Okay. I'm going to go to a different screen, so I won't be able to see any comments now that I'm going to another screen. So, all right. So let's look at it fairly and objectively. It looks a little shady. No question. That's another animal we won't be able to prove. They arrived at the house together, got into an argument. She was driving and left. The friend says, what's the name of the Canton cop living in Canton? The one involved, the BPD, have any jurisdiction here because it was their own. But I assume you guys are out to make it cut and dry because it involves cops. Something stinks. Yeah, but there will be some serious charges brought on the girl. All right. So looking at that in isolation, it looks a little suspicious. It looks a lot suspicious. All right. But you have to look at all of the evidence. And again, there is no evidence. There's nothing to really explain why Michael Proctor would risk his career and his freedom to plant evidence. And this is the whole thing here that I've talked about. My main argument against the possibility of there being evidence planted in here has never been lack of motivation, although I do insist that I don't see any real motivation here. I still say that. Okay? But motivation by its nature is always murky because what I've always said, and I used to have these conversations with Sean McDonough, back in the day on the phone. Motivation could be something that we don't understand that's undiscovered. Now, I'm not talking about Michael Proctor, but I'm just talking about in any case, you can have something where someone has dirt on somebody else and can control them in that way. So you are involved in, I don't know, some kind of a theft. You pilfer some funds from a company, something fairly significant. You pilfer, $100,000 from a company, and the police are investigating it. And you need to get the fix in. And one of the officers investigating it is someone that and you have dirt on him. All right. That officer lied to get ahead, that officer slept with an underage girl. That's obviously the worst kind of dirt, right? Think about what happened in the Birchmore case. Sandra Birchmore was threatening the officer that she was going to go to the police and tell them how he was guilty of statutory rape by sleeping with an underage girl. So she had that leverage over him, was trying to get him to do her bidding. Well, something similar could happen here where somebody has that kind of leverage over an investigator and they use that. So that's why I've always said that we look for motive and we do have to look at it, but it's really it's always murky because something like that is, at least for us on the outside here. Now, maybe police can find something, or investigators or FBI digging into that could find evidence of something like that, but very difficult for us on the outside too. And this is why I focus on the evidence of logic, of timelines. And so my argument always in this case has been that there was no time to plant evidence. That first piece of taillight, which is the most fundamental piece of evidence, was found by the CERT team digging shoulder to shoulder, 7 guys in a small space the size of 2 parking spaces, with other people surrounding them, with a WBZ news crew there. That they were digging into that. They found that piece 3 feet down at ground level. They found that at 5:45. That is just way too late. The CERT team, the testimony was that they started digging a little bit around 5:20, but they really dug in earnest when the 7th and final man arrived, and I think that was 5:38. So they really started digging in earnest at 5:38, and they found that main piece only 7 minutes later. So the Lexus was driven into the Sallyport at 5:36. The Sallyport door closed at 5:41, and it's a 5-minute drive to get to the crime scene. So even if, as soon as the Lexus, all right, so if the Lexus is driven, it's driven into the Sallyport by the tow truck driver, who has to now, if you're going to commit a crime, you're going to wait until he leaves. Now let's assume that this tow truck driver hops out of the car, shakes the hands of the cops and says goodnight, and takes off. So that still takes, what, a minute or two? So under those circumstances, the very earliest that Michael Proctor or anybody could have smashed that taillight would be, say, what, 12:38? So let's say you smash it at 12:38. And then you drive. Well, they'd have to hand it off to someone else, actually, because they've already tracked later on the locations of Proctor's phones, and they knew that they confirmed that he never went to the crime scene that day. And neither had his partner, Yuri Buchanan. So he hands it off to someone else at 5:38. And that person races to the crime scene. And the cars, it was a mad scene of parking there, because the street was only partly plowed. And so they had to park at all kinds of difficult angles, and the street was filled with vehicles. Each one of those people on the CERT team had a vehicle. So that's 7. Then there were multiple people there, like Lieutenant Tully and some other people that were watching things. So that's going to be probably at least 2 or 3 vehicles. And then there's the NBC News truck. So that street was jammed up with vehicles. So you're telling me, and it was still snowing hard, that this person left at 5:38, somehow raced through the blizzard to the crime scene 5 minutes away, and managed to park in that mess of vehicles and go in there and bury that tailpiece 3 feet down at ground level. They had to dig through 3 feet of snow. You're telling me all that was done within minutes? No, it's just not possible. It's not reasonable to believe that something like that was possible. So this is why, when you discuss motive, so when something like, to contend that something like that was possible, you have to believe that the state police CERT team was all in on it, and they basically looked the other way while that taillight piece was planted down at ground level. You have to believe that. There's no way they're not going to observe this. They're shoveling shoulder to shoulder in a tiny area. If somebody shows up on the scene that's not part of their group and suddenly is burying a piece 3 feet in the snow, the CERT team would have to be complicit, all of them. They'd have to be looking the other way. So what would the motive be? If there's some undiscovered motive for Michael Proctor to want to risk his freedom and his career to plant evidence in a murder case, it's not enough to protect a cop. And they don't even it's not even protecting a trooper. These guys are troopers. Who are they allegedly protecting? A Boston police officer who lives in the house? Why? And they're going to frame an innocent person. They're going to risk everything, their whole careers, everything. And it's not just one person that has to do this, but all these guys on the CERT team and Lieutenant Tully, all these guys are willing to, they have a strong enough motive here to take on that kind of risk? No, they don't. And this is why you have to have a rational argument about this. But looked at in isolation, if she wants to focus on motive here, I'm willing to have that discussion with her on a reasonable level. I would say something similar to what I just did. That this is the focus of my book is that the motive is, there's no sufficient motive that is known to explain why Michael Proctor would plant evidence in this case. And there isn't. Even looking at the face value of these texts does not in any way suggest why someone would have motive to plant evidence. So the Red Sox did not manage to get a run in that inning. They left the bases loaded. Roman Anthony struck out. Then at the top of at the bottom of the inning, one of the guys from San Diego hit a home run to tie the game, and now the Red Sox again are loaded. They're getting bases going. They got first and third with, let's see how many outs there are when they show it, with 0 outs. Good. So he got first and third with 0 outs. So there's no excuse for not getting a run in here. Come on now. And they have a different pitcher in too, I think. Peralta, yeah. Why are they going with a different pitcher in the third inning? It's such a low-scoring game. That's really weird. So Trevor Story is up. Veteran guy, 18 home runs this year. He ought to at least get something. Oh, it might turn on all right. So he hit it to the pitcher who fielded it, and now the runner at third is in a pickle. All right, so the Red Sox ran the bases very well. To the runner who was at first, managed to get all the way to third, which means that the guy in the pickle held things long enough for him to get there. So now it's it's first and third, but now there's 1 out. So again, you get that sack fly or a bunt, and you get the run home. So it's a failure there, but it was good base running by Bregman to smart base running. Love to see smart ball play. So anyways, back to motive. There is insufficient motive here, and I'll let her discuss this a little bit more, see if she had anything better.
When his friends are like, something smells funny here. You mean a Boston cop died on the front lawn of another Boston cop? Isn't that weird? And Proctor's like, oh, no. He's one of us. He's a Boston cop too. Many times in that conversation, his buddies from high school, these are high school buddies, right? Think about that. Think about your high school friends. Michael Proctor's not 22 years old. So think about having high school buddies who you've had for 20 years. And think about them asking you, what was the name of the homeowner? Definitely gets brought up at least twice. What was the name of the guy, the Boston police officer who lived in the house, who owned the house? Michael Proctor never gives his name. Why do you think he's protecting him like that?
All right, I didn't see what happened there. I took my eye off the screen, but the red, it looks like a balk, but that doesn't make sense. But the Red Sox scored a run, and then now something else just happened where they've scored another run. So it's now 3-1 with a runner at first. All right, the second thing was a dribble ground ball in the infield. And all right, it was a dribble ground ball in the infield, and the pitcher tried to make a play. It was either the pitcher or the first baseman tried to make a play at home plate, and it didn't. It failed. The runner was safe, and so still 1 out. Runner at first now, and now the Red Sox have 2 runs in. So very good base running.
Let's think about it. And maybe this is hard for Kevin Lenahan or whatever the hell his name is to understand because he's never been.
Whatever the hell his name is. See, just you want to pretend to be you're somehow neutral here. You add in whatever the hell his name is. Do you think I've made up my name too, honey? I mean, God damn. Where do they find these people?
And a cop. But as a psychologist, I've never been a cop either, but I understand human beings and I understand the mentality.
You don't seem to understand them very well, sweetheart. I'm sorry. To think that these cops are going to risk everything to plant evidence just because the homeowner who they're alleging is the killer, someone they don't know personally, they're going to risk it all for that person? No, they're not. You think those guys on the CERT team We're going to look the other way as evidence is planted in a murder case for no reason, just because it's allegedly a cop involved. It's crazy. It's crazy. No, you don't get you're not, I don't know if you are a psychologist because you don't understand human beings.
Mentality of the brotherhood of police, firefighters, of military people. The brotherhood is what it's all about. That's why people do.
So what do you know about the brotherhood, sister? Have you ever been part of a brotherhood? You think the brotherhood is such that police, in order to protect other cops that they don't know, are going to go around and manufacture and frame innocent people by manufacturing evidence? That's what you believe. Listen, if you want to argue to me that Bigfoot is real, I would love Bigfoot to be real. I want to be a believer, but I need to see the evidence. All right. Now, where is the evidence here for you, psychologist who understands people? Where is the evidence that this kind of planting of evidence goes on nationally, anywhere in the world, anywhere in this country, that police are so motivated to help other cops that they're willing to plant evidence framing innocent people in murder cases? Where is the evidence of that besides on some crazy TV show? Now, you make it sound like it's not only rampant, but it's normalized. It's normal behavior on the part of police officers. Where is the evidence for that? What is the basis for your having that belief system? If you're a psychologist, you should be using some kind of a scientific approach. What is the scientific basis for saying that police are willing to risk their lives, the freedom, the welfare of their families in order to frame an innocent person? How many times, how often does this happen? I've seen it in the movies. I don't see it in real life. I'm not saying it's never happened, but there doesn't seem to be much evidence for it, so it's certainly rare. It's not the basis of something normalized. All right, so I'm running out of time to do this show, so I'm going to, I didn't mind the fact that she pointed out Michael Proctor's testimony, so that was a good job on her part, and so that's why I addressed it and tried to address it objectively. And she's welcome to have me on her show or to come on this show and discuss that. And I would, the full picture's back, and I would make the exact same argument that I just made to you guys, and you guys can let me know what you think about it. But I don't buy into the motive for police to frame evidence, not just to frame. So there's different aspects. One, the penalty for being caught for these cops is incredibly high. You're going to jail for a very long time for framing someone for murder. You're going to lose your career. Your family's going to lose it all. All right? Two, the likelihood of being caught is incredibly high. All right? Because you're talking about planting evidence 16 hours after John was struck, or whatever you want to think happened. 16 hours later. That's 16 hours for all kinds of things to happen. For example, for someone to take a video or a picture of the Lexus that shows there was no damage to the taillight. Now, they couldn't, at that time, they had not inspected the vehicle, so they had no idea what the condition of the vehicle was. The CERT team had no idea. So anybody involved with that alleged conspiracy would have no idea. So if they're going to go with the theory that Karen struck John, what if it turns out there's no damage to the vehicle and there's some early video or image that proves that? They couldn't know. They couldn't know that once Karen took that vehicle back to her parents' house, that her father or her brother who worked at a car dealership didn't come out and take a picture of the taillight. They couldn't know that. They couldn't know that Karen might have pulled into the driveway in reverse so that their ring system at that house would have picked it up. They couldn't know that. So this is a high risk thing to do, to try to plant evidence in this case. You have a very good chance of being caught. You're also going to be caught if somebody else cooperates, if somebody else rats and tells the truth, somebody from inside the house. If you know that John was killed inside the house where there was an after hours party and there were multiple witnesses, how could you know for certain that one of those witnesses wouldn't come forward and talk to the police and say, hey, I was there and I know what really happened? So in that moment, 16 hours after the whatever happened to John, right? How could they know that? How could they know that someone from the house wouldn't come out and cooperate? They couldn't. So they would have all that stuff on their mind when they are actively participating in a cover-up to plant evidence. They would know that. So that makes this incredibly high risk. And there is no motive so incredibly high risk in terms of being caught, and incredibly high risk in terms of the price that you and your family will pay. So given all that incredible risk, they would have to have incredible motive in order to participate in something like that. Way more motive than just the old boys network of cops, the old boys buddy thing, the brotherhood, the blue wall of steel. No. You need much more than that. So I don't know. You say you understand human nature, Samantha, but you need a lot of work. I don't have the letters next to my name, but I understand it better than you. Why? Because I'm more logical. I'm not trying to be mean to you. You're not very logical. Debbie Farrier, you're not making a very compelling argument. All right. She was not. And first of all, your argument you just said was factually wrong. So that's enough would be justification for me to block you. I'm not really in the mood to do it. But you said she was found not guilty twice. Do you understand how stupid that statement is? All right. If she was found not guilty the first time, there would be no second trial. All right. That's called double jeopardy. That's why there won't be a third trial. You can only be found not guilty once, and then that's it. It's closed. That's called double jeopardy. So she was not found not guilty twice. So not only are you factually ignorant, you don't even understand the law. You're absurd. So this is the thing. Do you ban people for stupidity? That's always been the great debate here. We generally don't, because stupidity can make you amusing. But at some point, if it becomes too much of a distraction, your stupidity can result in you being banned. I'm sorry. So you are going to have to check your stupidity at the door. And if you want to comment here, maybe think real hard, think twice before what you post, because what you just said was many degrees of silly. All right, guys. Thank you very much for being here. Went on a little longer than I anticipated. So we have a pretty good crowd considering things. Like I said, the bottom falls out the way this case goes. We're down to a couple hundred watching on YouTube and maybe a couple hundred watching on Twitter. So that's doing the show now. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Karen Reed. I talked about her tonight because I wanted to come in and talk about the new format that we're going to be doing, which has been colored by my Karen Reed experience, and try to focus on the truth, on objectivity, on fairness. I try to apply the same standard to this Samantha here. I asked you guys if she has accurately represented Michael Proctor's texts, and you said that they seemed accurate to you. So I accept that and looked at them again, and I say, all right, under that light, I can agree where some people would find these texts most people would find these texts to be somewhat suspicious. But are they suspicious enough to create the motive to justify this level of conspiracy by multiple cops it would require to be involved? We're talking about at least 11. It would have to involve Proctor, his partner, Yuri Buchanek. It would have to involve the seven-man CERT team, and Lieutenant Tully, who commanded the whole group, and possibly other cops that were involved in this investigation. Do any of those cops have the incentive to want to take on the risk that we're talking about? So I think I approached it fairly and objectively, and that's how I always want to do it. And I also use you guys to help me verify things that are reported that I don't have the information in front of me. And you guys all reported back that those are accurate, so I accepted that. So thank you very much for helping me as a source for me. I appreciate that. And that's how we're going to do it. So we will be starting a week from this Monday, having a show with different topics, guests, co-hosts, every night at 8 o'clock. Hopefully seeing me talk to you by myself will become somewhat rare. I will have other people with me, so it'll be a more interesting format, I think. Most of these are people you know, but there'll be some new co-hosts and guests that'll be on. Yeah. Court TV misses me. Well, I don't think they know they miss me. I don't think they know that. No one's told them. So, but this is what we're going to do. So we're going to cover different cases. We're going to do a focus on cold cases, but not just cold cases, topics, missing people, reports, and things like that. And we're going to try to bring on guests who've written other true crime books. Treasure, no interview, upcoming plans with any of the witnesses. I talked about this earlier, but the person who had reached out wanting to do that backed down just minutes before we were going to do it. So it is what it is. Thank you, Ken. Ken has somebody, he's trying to get in touch with me. It'd be impressive if you manage to do that. Oh, Red Sox are now, the lead has been cut to 3-2. It would be impressive because this is not someone that probably wants to face opposition or difficult questions, even if they're presented in a way that's very civil. Treasure Boy says, Turtle live in 10 minutes, folks. Like, you're going to find that very few people here care about that, Treasure. But again, that reveals who you are, too. Anybody who's after the truth is not listening to that show. And that's just a fact. That's not my contention. That's a fact. Because this guy will not report anything to you that doesn't fit the narrative that you want to hear, the narrative that you want to hear, that you and his audience want to hear. You all want to be in that echo chamber. That's what you want. That's what he's built. And he won't give anything that's going to challenge that. If he finds that he has, in the past, reported something, if he gets new evidence that shows it was wrong, he won't correct the record. If something comes out in a document, hard evidence that doesn't fit his narrative, I've challenged him on this. He won't report it to his audience. And his own audience, the people that have been with him for a long time, they know that what I just said is true. He's not going to tell them anything they don't want to hear. He's not committed to the truth. He's about himself. Now, if you don't have the common sense to understand that, God help you. Or maybe you do understand it and you just don't care. Either way is a problem. I don't know which is worse. But I wish you luck, man. The words in the emails are data. You're probably talking about something that I missed in chat. The words Turtle Boy has, I can give you some examples. Turtle Boy insisted all summer, and then when I confronted him at the end of the summer of 2023 that he was getting his information directly from Karen and from her lawyers, he said, I'm a liar. And he insisted that it was completely untrue. And he told his lawyers, he told his audience that Kevin is a liar, that he gets nothing. He has no communication. He insisted that he gets no communication at all from Karen Reed. Now, anybody from common sense could see that you didn't even have to know anything about him. You could see that what he was getting came intact on day one of his first reporting, and it had to come from a defense team. Had to. There was information that was from discovery. So only someone on a defense team would have had access to that. It is what it is. But then later on, it came out, and he admitted finally later on when it came out, when the state revealed texts that they took from his phone, and when they took the phone records showed that Karen and Aiden were having direct communications, more than daily during that summer, more than daily, hundreds of them. In addition, we have all seen, many of us, the first few weeks of that communication were in May of 2023, and Turtle Boy was Karen was using a go-between to communicate with Turtle Boy, Natalie, her friend in California. So, and they were using an encryption app called Signal. Now, eventually they talked Turtle Boy into using Signal, and once that happened, then he could communicate directly with Karen. But before that happened, she had to use a middleman in Natalie. And so Natalie would have to get a message and take a screenshot so she wouldn't forget it, and then send a message to Turtle Boy, and vice versa. And so she, with no diabolical motive, saved all of those text messages. She just never deleted them. And so eventually they became evidence. But before they even became evidence, she had shared them with me and others, and they proved that Karen was communicating through Natalie directly with Turtle Boy in late April and in early May. And then afterwards, that communication became direct. It also showed, the phone record showed, that both Alan Jackson and David Yannetti had dozens of calls with Turtle Boy during that period. Now, Turtle Boy lied to his audience. That's just fact. You can't get around it. In addition, I remember in September when the state came out with a document that showed the GPS, and the GPS showed pretty powerfully that John never went in the house, or at least his phone didn't. Now, I predicted on a show that morning that Turtle Boy was not going to ever tell his audience about this. And so he did a show that night, and he had already responded to my claim about that by saying on a tweet that Kevin lies. He says, Kevin lies, but I have to read the document. I don't know yet, or something like that. So he said I was lying about it, but yet admitted he hadn't read the document yet. All right. So that night, he didn't bring it up. Like I said, he did, 3-hour show, and through the first 2 hours and 45 minutes, he would not address the new evidence they provided about the GPS. Nor would he present the evidence about microscopic tail-like pieces being found in John's clothing. So at the end of his show, when he takes the questions, somebody in the audience, maybe someone that came from here, but someone that had been listening to me, said, what about the claim that the GPS shows that John never went in the house? Now he had to address it because it was in those comments at the end. And he just said, it's a lie, is what he said. Didn't give a reason, didn't give an argument. And then he added something strange. Somebody said, what about the microscopic tail-like pieces? And you're going to think I'm making this up, but you can go back and listen to the episode. It was in September of 2023. He goes, oh, well, that's easy. Trooper Proctor sprinkled those pieces onto John's clothing, of course. So with no evidence at all, Aiden Kearney told his audience that Michael Proctor sprinkled microscopic tail-like pieces onto the clothing of John O'Keefe. That's how he treats his audience. That's how he cares about the truth. So I don't want to hear anybody who tries to argue that Turtle Boy cares about the truth. He doesn't. It's not even part of his agenda. It's just not even part of it. So, all right, guys, thank you very much for being here. I'll be back again soon. Not sure when. This show turned out a little longer than possible. Hopefully this microphone sounded good. And Carla, yes, I've gone through the evidence. I think you know that. Treasures, please try to have a little bit more of an open mind when it comes to Turtle Boy. If you have any street smarts, this guy's not interested in the truth. He's interested in being a cult leader. I don't even think he's really motivated by money, to tell you the truth, although he's making a huge amount of money based on this case. And I think obviously that means something to him, but I really don't think money is the guy is what drives that guy. That guy's motivating thing is apparently, and I take this from what his mother told Boston Magazine in the interview. He's always wanted to be the center of attention. He's always wanted a huge audience to follow him. Now, as a young man, he didn't have any of that. He was a geek. He was a super Eagle Scout in high school. So this would have been a kid that had few friends and no following. And I'm not trying to knock him for that. That's okay. But now he has what he wants. So, that's been what his motive is. So, all right. So we'll just answer. Lastly, Jane, thank you for asking. Said, how are the treatments? So this is, I had a chemotherapy today. Everything went good, but there was a little area with the wound closure and stuff like that. So they wanted me to keep this on a little longer, the bandage a little bit. Usually you can see the swelling area there. So, everything's going pretty good though. I feel pretty good. And, the most recent scans were very encouraging and, not unexpected. Chemo is generally effective for several months. So the plan now is to keep monitoring it, and hopefully the chemo will be effective for more than just a few months. And there's every reason to believe that it will. And so let's say the chemo is effective for 6 months and the cancer remains at bay. Then there are options after that. So first of all, there is the treatment, the antibody treatment, the monoclonal antibody treatment that they've tried to get into my body twice, but I go into anaphylactic shock each time. My heart starts shutting down. And I'm willing to go through it again as many times as needed to try to get through it. But they don't want to, I went through it twice where it almost killed me. So they don't want to, they're reluctant to do that again. But there is a version of the treatment that is much more safe. It just hasn't been approved in this country yet. It's been approved in Europe. And so they're thinking it might be approved by the end of the year. It has to do with the packaging at the facility, believe it or not. So it's some bureaucratic thing. But this is something that's very promising for my type of cancer. But in addition to that, there was some other new medicine for my specific type of cancer, my specific type of lung cancer that's been approved. And there's other ones that are close to it. So this is the encouraging thing. There are more options. And every couple months that goes by, there are even more options and even better options. So a lot of reasons to be optimistic. But until that time, I will be on chemo indefinitely every 3 months. And so, but chemo's no big deal. There's different types of chemo for different people. The chemo that I'm going through is not really any suffering thing to go through. It really isn't. So don't feel bad for me. It's just the worst part of the chemo is driving into Boston. It really is. So don't worry about me. And if I wasn't looking and if I wasn't feeling strong and feeling good, I wouldn't take on this incredible new workload. Thank you, Red. I wouldn't take on this incredible new workload that I'm taking on. Starting now because we're doing work to prepare for it. But something that will be beginning in earnest a week from Monday. So it's going to be a lot of work. So hopefully we get started off on a good, strong foot, but it'll be something that will grow based on the team. So the team is the people that are working directly with us, but you guys are part of the team too. And if anybody wants to join that team more directly, reach out to me. And we haven't decided yet whether we're going to establish a new Discord for this, something that is much smaller and much something that's limited just to the people that are directly working with us, and as a way to help us keep track of cases that we're really interested in, suggest cases, guests to reach out for us. We'd like if people that are with us, thank you, Christina, people that have been with us, that are willing to reach out for guests on our behalf. Those are things you could do to help us out. You could help out with research and putting together things like that. So there are things that if anybody out there has an interest in joining our team in the background, or even if you really see yourself as a possible co-host and you want to, whatever, maybe you reach out to me on that. I'm being very cautious about those interviews too, though. So I don't want to do a ton of those, but if you reach out, we'll talk to you, and I'll see what the other people on my other teammates think about that kind of stuff. So good to see you, Colin. But certainly if you want to help in the background, help us be part of. I know a lot of people don't want to really get their name out because of the mob. So if you want to help in the background and with research or any part of the work that goes into it, we'd appreciate it. So, all right, guys, have a good night. And Thomas Fleming is on vacation. He will be back, I believe, Monday. So we didn't see him tonight, but he has limited internet connection where he is. So he may not have even known that there was a show. There's going to be actually 5 shows a week, at least. There may be more eventually. And these shows, now, one of the shows I might not even be on. I will be in the background bringing in slides, but I'm not going to mention who's in it yet until it's 100% certain. But it's people you know, it's people you trust. Trust me, believe me. And so you're going to like them. No ice cream tonight. We're going to get pie. So there's a lot of work to go on, but there's a lot of reason to believe this will work out. And so I hope you guys give it a chance to grow as we work out the new format. But I think you'll like it. I think you'll like where, and I think it's something that can be built off. And if we can get I normally, I would love to have Joe K on, but I don't talk to him much anymore. I don't know what he's up to. He's very busy. But I would love to see. This is the problem with the numbers shrinking down like they do here, and we got to get them back up because it's really hard to get guests. Like, so let's say I reach out to someone who's published a true crime book, and I say, "Would you like to come on my channel and talk about your book?" Well, their degree of interest is going to be directly proportional to the size of the audience here. And if only 1,000 people are going to watch videos over the course, of a week, that's not very good numbers. So it's going to be harder to convince them to want to come on the show. So if we could get back something closer to the numbers that we were doing during the trial, that would be solid numbers. But it's going to be tough to get back to that because obviously the trial is over. And we're going to try to do this we're going to try to get the numbers back the old-fashioned way. But one advantage is we might have a little bit more of a national audience too, because we'll talk about cases that are different too. But we're going to try to get there. We're going to try to get those numbers up. And so, yeah, the other things that you can do to help is once we start doing this, you can retweet the posts of the videos. Retweet links to it. We can put up a link ahead of time. Will Phelps come on? I think you mean? No, Phelps will not be coming on this channel. Nope. I'm not particularly interested in that. And I'm sure he's not either. But, other guests that I would still like to have on when we can are people like John DePetro. It's always good to talk to John. Occasionally we'll have on the Drunken Turkey, but he's a great guy too. He's a friend of the channel. His channel numbers are doing great because they just continue to grow the interest in the Brian Kohlberger case, which is what he's covering. So I tend to somewhat lose interest in a case once it's over, but obviously the public has not lost interest in that case at all. So yeah, we're going to always try to talk common sense. You're not going to always agree with my arguments. You might not have agreed with what I said, I said earlier about Michael Proctor's texts. You might not agree with that. Obviously, Samantha's not going to agree with that, but you guys might not either. So we'll see. I have another friend who I talk to once in a while, who's also a former federal law enforcement officer. And he is in the process of publishing some true stories based on his experience in police work. He's going to publish some of those stories, and I'm trying to talk him into I'm trying to talk him into publishing them. Self-publish them on Amazon, and then come on the channel and talk about him, because he's a great guy, and I've talked to him many times, and I'd love to have him on the show regularly, to tell you the truth. I think you guys would enjoy him as much as I just enjoy talking to him. So I'm not even going to say his name right now, but he did undercover work as a federal police officer for years. So he has a lot of interesting stories. So hopefully we'll get him in to talk on. So as far as Boomer and Matt, I have no idea what they're up to. I have no idea. We can see if they want to come on and talk about the case, but I suspect, I don't know. I know Matt does most of his stuff on TikTok, so I don't know if he's still talking about the case. He may have lost interest in it. I really don't know. Boomer, I suspect, has lost all interest in it. And I think Kate still has an interest in it, and she's still working behind the scenes, but I don't think her interest is to be doing shows about it. But I'm sure she'd be willing to come on again and just talk. It's always good to talk to Kate. And Matt did one the other week. So he may be still doing, was it on Karen Reed? So he may be still doing stuff. And I will still talk about important things that come out. I'm not going to do a show on Karen Reed wanting her Lexus back. That's not interesting to me. That's grifty to do things like that. But I'll come on once in a while if something important comes out about, for instance, anytime something important comes out about the feds, we'll do a breaking news moment and come out on that. We'll at least do a segment on that night. Good idea, Red. We'll make this we'll make this the last comment of the show. We should see if the friend of the girls killed by Alan Jackson's new client in California wants to come on. That will be a good case to follow. So yeah, we can start following that case. You have to fight back against people like Alan Jackson. You can't let them subvert the justice system like they are. All right. So that's a very good idea, Red. I'm glad to have you with us. And let's start. Somebody remind me if I don't write a note on this, since I don't have a way of writing a note at the moment, that we want to do that. I'm inclined to feel the same way, Hillbilly, but I also want to be defensive about being fully sympathetic to them looking out for the best interests of their own families. And no one can make that judgment for them. They have to make it themselves. So, it's something that they just have to live. Everybody has to make, every one of the families involved. These are deeply personal decisions, and they have to make them on their own. Okay, guys, time for me to let this go, and I'll see you all again very soon. Thank you. Have a good night.